Shalom, family, in the name of Yeshua, Jesus Christ. It's your brother, the preacher, and we're here with Torah Nuggets. Amen. Now, yesterday we were talking about complainers, and we were in chapter 11. And I want to continue in there. We read verses 1 through 10, and we talked about how the children of Israel began to complain about the food and began to complain about their journey. And we see that God does not like complainers. But I also want to switch a little bit of gears and talk about Moses in this chapter and what Moses was going through and what Moses felt, and any good leader could go through. And we as the people, part of the congregation, could drive our leader to, well, almost suicidal. Now, Numbers 11:11 says, Moses said unto the Lord, wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of all these people upon me? Have I conceived all this people? Have I begotten them, that thou shouldest say unto me, carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth a suckling child, unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers? Whence should I fetch, or where should I have flesh to give unto these people? For they weep unto me, saying, give us flesh, that we may eat. I am not able to bear all this people alone, because it is too excuse me, heavy for me. And if thou deal thus with me, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand. If I have found favor in thy sight, let me not see my wretchedness. So Moses is actually telling God to kill him. He basically nearly going suicidal here because of the burdens of the people complaining. So we're going to deal with two things. First, I want to deal with, and we're going to read from our book, Unrolling the Scroll. We're going to deal with Moses under pressure first. From that verse there, where Moses said, why have you been so hard on me, or hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in thy sight, that you have laid thy burden of all this people upon me? I once sought a counselor from a senior pastor of a church I was attending at the time. I told him I'm feeling called to serve God in ministry as a teacher. I'm thinking about becoming a pastor. He looked at me with a very weird but sympathetic expression and said, don't do it unless there's nothing else in the world that you can imagine yourself doing. He went on to explain that being a congregational leader or teacher is one of the most difficult jobs a person could ever undertake. Why? Because of the burden of the people. Moses cried out, why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me? Moses was exhausted with the ceaseless grumbling and complaining of the people. He said, I alone am not able to carry all this people, because it is too burdensome for me. He begged God to put him out of his misery by taking his life. If you are a parent, you know how maddening it can be when your children are whining and complaining about all manner of trivial matters. A spiritual leader is in a similar position, but with many more children. My father served several years in a various pastorates. He was not a complainer, but even as a child, I could see his spiritual and physical exhaustion. The next time you are tempted to complain about your pastor, leader, rabbi, teacher, or the next time you find yourself complaining about your church, congregation, or faith community, remember the story of Moses. The cumulative burden of the people's complaints was enough to put Moses out on the edge. How much more so your spiritual leaders? Moses was the greatest leader the nation of Israel has ever known, but dealing with people made him suicidal. If Moses could not withstand the pressures of leading God's people, how much less can the average person withstand those pressures? The irony of this passage is that Moses himself became a complainer. He was complaining about the people always complaining. In doing so, he became the very thing he criticized. One time I was grumbling to my wife about a certain person. I felt the person was too critical and always pointing out other people's faults. As I told my wife about it, it suddenly occurred to me that I was doing the same thing by complaining about the complainer. I was guilty of the same sin. God rescued Moses by giving him other leaders to help him carry the burden of the people and to remind Moses of his sufficiency. Those who are undertake this to serve the kingdom of heaven through leading God's people need to remember both of these things. Our congressional leaders can find relief by sharing the burden of responsibility with a plurality of leaders, and they need to remember to rely on God's strength rather than their own. My father wrote to me about his struggles with depression while pastoring his first church. We were living from hand to mouth. I carried on ministries that didn't pay and worked long hours to make a living and to study and prepare for ministries. I was in one of those deep depressions, almost despairing of life, almost suicidal. We came home from Sunday school, and Sherry, just as cute and as little curly-haired blonde could be, said, "Daddy, I learned a verse in Sunday school. Do you want to hear me say it?" "Yes, I do, Sherry," I replied. Sweet as could be, she said, "Thou, God, carest for me." It was like the times of a Bible jumped right off the page at me, hit me so hard, so wonderfully. My spirit soared. Of course, God cares for me. Why am I so depressed and afraid? God cares for me. There's two parts that I'll end up doing with with the depression part of Moses and then even ourselves. But I'm going to slow up here real quick. For this will be a shorter Torah nugget. I, we're gonna I think that we can do part two of being a complainer and what a complainer actually causes people to do. It affects your leadership. It affects your community. It affects your household. It affects people, and then in turn, you could fall into being a complainer. You know, even in leadership, you could be in leadership, and you man, this person that, and then all of a sudden you start becoming that. You have this critical spirit, and these things tear you down. They mess you up. So again, what I've learned, and I'm just giving you some spiritual advice. What I've learned is I've learned to control my mouth, and I've learned the Lord to deal in my heart and be be like the two men that held up Moses' arms when they went to war. They would when Moses would get weak and his arms would they would come up, they would undergird him and lift him up. And that's what you need to do. You need to be an uplifter. You need to be complaining. The next time that you feel like you want to complain about something, just go in your prayer room. Just go ask the Lord. And I've had to do it many of times. Many of times I might not agree with something, even in congregation, even in my church, something the pastor said, something the pastor did. But you know what? God has touched touch God's not God's anointed. Don't mess around with who God appointed in that position. Later on in the book of Numbers, we'll see how members of the congregation wanted to ransack Moses. They wanted the priesthood too. They wanted the leadership too. I would say be very careful in how you use your tongue, how you speak about people, how you speak about situations. Some people get self-righteous and they think they can rebuke everybody. And a lot of times you don't even have that spiritual authority in people's life. That's a word for somebody. Be careful the next time you open your mouth to complain, to criticize, to speak. Look for the better things in man. Look for the better things in man. Seek peace. Today's word from you version says, let us not be weary in well doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. And sometimes we faint back because of things that we see and I don't like, and you become discontent and you deprive yourself of contentment. We're staying on this topic because I think it's a very important topic for the people to hear. Speak good things. In the book of Proverbs it says that my lips will speak excellent things. And so just be careful. Be careful the next time you want to grumble about your faith community, about your leaders, people around you. Just be careful. Man, we love you, family. In the name of Yeshua, support the ministry, subscribe to the channel. Shalom, shalom.